My name is Kelly K. Branyik, and I'm the author of the new sapphic dystopian sci-fi romance novel, Shadows in Dreamstone, a story that follows Abaddon Ordell, who is criminalized for her miscarriage and sentenced to 9 years in Dreamstone prison. The guards are hostile, the warden is a liar, and everybody wants her dead, except one person. She now has to navigate this prison until she ultimately finds her purpose in taking down an oppressive regime. So I created Shadows in Dreamstone back in 2022 after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And I was feeling a deep sense of anger and frustration and sorrow around the fate of women's reproductive rights. I'm a CSU Pueblo alumni with a bachelor's degree in English creative writing. So one of my favorite concepts in literature is the concept of a Byronic hero, which is a person who does bad things for a good reason. We know them and we love them. Dexter is one of those. Robin Hood is one of those. Kitty Collins from How to Kill Men and Get Away with It. Those are all Byronic heroes. They do bad things for a good reason. I needed that hero, so I created one, and her name is Abaddon Ordell. What started as a standalone novel turned into a series of 3 with a prequel. I hope that when people read this story, they continue to feel that passion towards fighting and that strength to keep fighting for rights women have fought for decades. I hope that people don't close their eyes to the very real issues that are happening in the world right now that affect women and minorities and communities that have continuously been marginalized. I just really want people to continue staying alert to what's happening right now. Shadows in Dreamstone is the first book in the Dark Stars series and primarily takes place in a prison setting, which was a challenge because I needed to keep the pace moving without it feeling repetitive and mundane. But I'm happy to say in book 2 of the Dark Stars series, Abaddon does get to go back into the real world. She reunites with her little sister and her best friend, and from there they start plotting. And that's all I'm going to say about that. For a long time, my writing process involved me getting up at the crack of dawn and writing 3 hours before my full-time job. And then once my full-time job was over, I'd spend the rest of the night writing my novel. I actually had a very bizarre writing process for this book because around the time that I finished and was putting it through edits with my mentor and friend, Stephanie Butland, my father passed away. I was going through so much grief and I felt like I had lost so much of myself and I didn't have any motivation to write anymore. By the time I picked my book back up a year later, I couldn't even remember, couldn't even tell you what my writing process was like. I was so completely changed by my grief that I felt like I had to reinvent that writing process. And I'm a person who likes to learn new things, even if I feel like I have a good grasp of it. So I'm constantly on a search for good writing texts that help me be a better writer. And I know I'm not always going to get it correct, but I'm still going to try anyway. All that said, I feel like this time, having written Shadows in Dreamstone, I have a better process in place that draws from books like How to Write a Page Turner and Save the Cat and Story Genius. Those things influence how I map out my story from start to finish now. So I actually have a brief in Scrivener that I use to tell me how it's going to start, how it's going to end, what happens along the way, the stories that happen in between. And now I feel more equipped to write this story. I know where it's heading. And I built that page into my Scrivener so that I can refer back to it easily as I'm writing. Some books that I've read recently are Watermoon, and I enjoyed every bit of that magical realism. Yellowface, which was brilliantly written, and I've never wanted a character to fail so badly in my life. The Last Contract of Asako by Fonda Lee was another favorite of mine, and that was my first experience reading anything of hers as well. I also still have a soft spot for fantasy novels. I'm currently finishing Onyx Storm. Before that, I listened to the audiobook version of Phantasma, which was narrated by award-winning narrator Laura Horowitz, who's also going to be narrating my novel, Shadows and Dreamstone in February 2027. I also like to read indie novels as well, and have recently picked up books like Portraits of Decay by J.R. Blaines, which is a very disturbing but very entertaining read. And then Lady Hawk retelling called Behind the Eyes by Sharon K. Angelisi. There is no shortage of books in my house, and I have a very long TBR. I like to read a little bit of everything. Advice on reading from multiple genres is one that I got from V.E. Schwab at a book signing I went to in Denver. But I felt like it was such great advice and gives me a chance of being a more rounded author. Shadows and Dreamstone is a dystopian novel. It is dark, there are times that it's disturbing, and it follows themes very similar to The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. So on the copyright page, I list these triggers and instructions that if at any time you feel uncomfortable or triggered by anything in this book, please put it down, step away, and prioritize your mental health. It is the most important thing. Even though this book is dark and disturbing and dystopian in a lot of ways, you will also find moments of joy, laughter, love, and hope. Now I'm going to read an excerpt from chapter 16. The nurse bot took notes of every test. The room was cold and Benedict had been gone for far too long. How long did it take to get coffee? Maybe he had to leave the hospital for it. Abaddon tried willing herself to relax, which was hard to do with feet in the stirrups. The nurse remained mostly silent through the examination, muttering a few words to the nurse bot as she searched for signs of she wasn't sure what. When she removed the speculum, she said, "Mrs. Saxon, it seems you've safely passed the fetus and the placenta. If the placenta were still attached to the uterus and left untreated, your body would have become septic and you would have needed an operation to move it. Since that's not the case here, you will be fine. But expect to have a period for the next 6 weeks. This is normal, but you may feel some discomfort as your body heals." "Thank you," Abaddon managed to say. The nurse nodded. "I will be back in a moment with a doctor." Abaddon lay her head back on the bed as the nurse left the hollow shade. The first bit of rest she was able to have all evening, but she was entirely restless, entirely worried for what came next. What happens now that she has no child? What happens to her and Benedict? Would they try again? Several minutes later, the hollow shade opened. When she opened her eyes, there was a doctor, the nurse, a police officer, and her husband, with his head bowed to his chest. "What's going on?" Abaddon asked as she sat upright, panic rising in her. The police officer moved to the bedside, helping her stand up. The doctor and nurse stood still, and Benedict refused to look at her. "Abaddon Saxon, you are under arrest for the murder of your unborn child," said the police officer. As he continued reciting her Miranda rights, the ones she saw in TV shows but never thought she'd hear herself, she shoved her hands behind her back, clasping her wrists together with electric handcuffs that zapped at her skin. "Benedict," she said with terror in her voice. Tears spilled down her cheeks. He still didn't look at her. She saw that his wedding ring was missing from his left hand and her heart stopped. Fear tugged at her gut. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening." "Benedict," she shouted as the police officer hauled her through the hollow shade enclosure. "Benedict, what did you do? What did you do?" "I told them the truth, Abaddon," he said, still not looking at her. In early praise of Shadows and Dreamstone, Kirkus Reviews says this feminist story delivers an indelible hero and a powerful, timely message. And Stephanie Butland, my mentor and best-selling author of the Lost for Words bookshop, calls this dystopia with a heart. I loved it. If this sounds interesting to you, you can find Shadows and Dreamstone anywhere books are sold, but you can also find it at Boulder Bookstore online or on the shelf near the register. Thank you so much for watching and hearing my story.